My name is Tiffany. I'm 29 years old, and my entire world came crashing down just 3 weeks ago. It all started on the front porch of our family's house in Asheville, North Carolina. I remember the useless weight of my key in my hand as I tried, for the third time, to make it turn in a lock that was no longer mine. Just then, my phone lit up with a message from my sister, Courtney. The words were stark and brutal. "You're not part of this family anymore. Don't come back." A knot of ice formed in my stomach as I read the text again, each word landing like a physical blow I never saw coming. Courtney and I had our share of disagreements, but this was different. Locking me out of the very home we shared our childhood in felt like a level of betrayal I couldn't have imagined. I pounded on the door, my voice raw as I yelled her name, but the only response was a profound and chilling silence. Then, 2 days later, a formal email from her lawyer landed in my inbox, and it was about to change absolutely everything. Before I get into the shocking details of what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single step of this journey. You are not going to believe where this story goes. Growing up in Asheville, our family home was always a landmark, a striking 2-story modern colonial that practically broadcasted our success to the entire neighborhood. But behind the impressive facade, the atmosphere was a constant, simmering pressure cooker. I quickly learned that being Tiffany Hayes meant my life was perpetually under a microscope. My sister, Courtney, who was 5 years my senior, was the undisputed star of the family. She effortlessly sailed through every exam, captivated every client, and slid into our parents' real estate business as if it were her destiny. Our parents, Marilyn and Philip Hayes, practically revered her. My mother, Marilyn, managed the business with the intense focus of a predator, always strategizing 3 moves ahead. My father, Philip, was the quiet force behind the numbers, always stoic and unbending, simply nodding in agreement with whatever my mother decreed. And then there was me, the perpetual outsider, the one who was always chasing a completely different kind of dream. My grandmother, Clara Hayes, was my sanctuary. She was the one person who truly saw me. We would spend countless hours together, her aged but steady hands guiding mine as we sketched fashion designs onto scraps of paper. "Tiffany," she would tell me, her voice a gentle but powerful whisper, "don't you ever let anyone clip your wings." Clara recognized a creative spark in me that she didn't see in Courtney or my parents. She would secretly pass me fabric samples, patiently teach me the basics of sewing, and share stories of her own unfulfilled dreams, dreams she had set aside to raise her family. Those afternoons with her were my only taste of real freedom, a world where I wasn't expected to become another cog in the real estate machine. But that freedom was tragically short-lived. When I was 14, Clara was diagnosed with a fast and aggressive form of cancer. She fought for 2 years before she passed away, leaving a void in my life that has never truly healed. After her death, Courtney seemed to step into a new role, almost as if she had been waiting for the opportunity. At 21, she was already working alongside my mother at Hayes Realty, but now her authority extended into our home life. My parents didn't even hesitate. They proudly handed her the reins, praising their responsible, business-minded daughter. I would sit through dinners listening to them sing her praises. "Courtney just closed another major deal today," or "Courtney has such a brilliant mind for business." All the while, my sketchbooks were collecting dust, and my aspirations of becoming a fashion designer were dismissed with condescending eye rolls. "Fashion is just a hobby, Tiffany," my mother would state, her tone leaving no room for argument. Real estate is your future. By the time I reached high school, our house felt less like a home and more like a war zone. I would stay awake late into the night, channeling my frustration into designing outfits and posting them online, where I found validation from strangers who saw the potential my own family refused to acknowledge. But every time I tried to discuss my passion, Courtney would immediately shut me down. "You're just wasting your time," she'd say with a dismissive flick of her hair, as if she owned the very air we breathed. "Nobody gets rich by doodling dresses." My dad would offer a non-committal shrug, and my mother would add the final nail in the coffin. "Hayes women build empires, not wardrobes." I fought back with everything I had. I joined the school's art club, entered every design competition I could find, and even managed to win a few. But it seemed the harder I pushed for my own path, the tighter their control became. College was the ultimate showdown. I was desperate to study fashion design at a prestigious school like Parsons or FIDM, but my parents had already mapped out my life. "You are going to UNC to major in business," my mother announced, sliding a university brochure across the polished dining room table. Courtney, who was already a top-tier junior there, just smirked from across the room. I pleaded, I argued, I laid out my entire portfolio for them to see. It was useless. "We are not wasting our money on some artsy nonsense," my dad said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. So I tried to find a middle ground. I enrolled in the business program but took on a minor in design, working late shifts at a local boutique to afford my own art supplies. After Courtney graduated, she joined Hayes Realty full-time and quickly became my mother's indispensable right hand. I, on the other hand, was practically invisible, except for the times they needed someone to blame for something. After I graduated, I managed to land a job at a small fashion startup in Charlotte. The salary was barely enough to live on, but I was finally designing, finally honoring the dream Clara had held for me. My visits home for holidays were always fraught with tension. "Still playing with scissors?" Courtney would ask with a sneer. My mother would just sigh dramatically. "You could be managing your own property listings by now." My dad would just stare at his plate, saying nothing at all. I kept my head down, saving every last dollar with the goal of one day launching my own brand. Then the startup I worked for went under. The funding disappeared overnight, and I was suddenly unemployed. With rent looming and my savings depleted, I was left with no other option. I had to ask if I could move back home just for a few months to get back on my feet. Courtney was livid. "You're 29, Tiffany, not 19, she spat, her arms crossed defensively in the living room. "This is not a hotel," my mother added. But for the first time in a long time, my dad spoke up. "She's family," he mumbled, and to my surprise, they relented. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, promising them I'd be gone in 6 months at the most. From the very first day, it was a nightmare. Courtney treated me like a teenager, imposing curfews, assigning chores, and even demanding a rent payment that I could barely scrape together from the occasional freelance project. My mother scrutinized my every action, constantly leaving brochures for job openings at Hayes Realty on my bed. "You're not getting any younger," she'd say, her voice sharp with disapproval. My dad, as always, remained a silent observer. The tension in the house grew thicker by the day. I spent my days sending out job applications and pitching my portfolio to any brand that would listen, but each rejection felt magnified under their roof. Courtney was merciless. "You're just mooching off of us," she would hiss whenever she caught me sketching late at night. "Why can't you just grow up?" I did my best to contribute. I paid what I could, I cooked, I cleaned, but it was never enough. The breaking point arrived 3 weeks ago. In a desperate attempt to prove my worth, I pitched them an idea to modernize Hayes Realty. I suggested digitizing their listings, creating virtual property tour, and launching a social media campaign. I thought it might show them I had business sense too. Courtney just laughed right in my face. "Stick to your crayons," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. My mother nodded in agreement, and my dad just looked away. That night, the years of resentment finally erupted. I confronted Courtney about her constant need for control, her deep-seated jealousy, and how she had always resented Clara's belief in me. She screamed back, accusing me of being a leech, of dragging the family name through the mud. "You're a failure, Tiffany," she spat, her face just inches from mine. "Clara was wrong about you." That was the comment that cut the deepest. I grabbed my bag, stormed out of the house needing to clear my head, and found a cheap motel for the night. The next morning, I had a job interview. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a start. I sent Courtney a text, telling her I'd be back later to talk, naively believing that a little time apart would cool things down. I never could have imagined that by the end of the day, I would be permanently locked out of my own home. I had stormed out of our family home in Asheville, my bag slung over my shoulder, promising myself I'd cool off and talk to her later. I checked into a cheap motel near downtown, the kind with flickering lights and thin walls, figuring I'd be back home by evening. The next morning, I had a job interview, a junior designer position at a local fashion brand. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a lifeline, a chance to get back on my feet. I pulled on my best blazer, practiced my pitch in the motel mirror, and sent Courtney a text. "I'll be back tonight. Let's talk." I hit send, hoping we could dial back the venom from last night. I never expected what came next. The interview went better than I dared to hope. The hearing manager liked my portfolio, said my designs had a fresh edge. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of optimism. Maybe I could rebuild without my family's constant jabs. I left the office around 4:00 p.m., my mind racing with possibilities, planning what I'd say to Courtney to smooth things over. "I'm trying, okay? I just need a little time," I rehearsed, gripping the steering wheel as I drove back to the house. I pulled into the driveway just after 4:30, the familiar colonial looming ahead, its windows catching the late afternoon light. Everything looked normal, too normal. I grabbed my key, walked to the front door, and slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. I jiggled it, thinking it was stuck, but nothing gave. My pulse quickened as I tried again, harder, the metal scraping uselessly. "What the hell?" I muttered, knocking on the door. "Courtney, Mom, Dad." No answer. I moved to the side door by the garage, the one we always used growing up. Same thing. My key went in but wouldn't budge. A cold dread settled in my chest as I circled to the back door, trying one last time. Nothing. Every lock had been changed. Standing on the back porch, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Courtney, straight to voicemail. I tried my mother, Marilyn, voicemail. My dad, Philip, same. Panic clawed at me as I dialed my cousin, Justin Porter, who lived an hour away in Charlotte. "Justin, something's wrong," I said when he picked up, my voice trembling. "I can't get into the house. The locks are different and nobody's answering." There was a long pause. "Tiffany, check your texts," he said, his tone heavy. I pulled the phone from my ear and saw a new message from Courtney, sent during my drive home. "You're not part of this family anymore," it read. "Don't come back. Your stuff's boxed up. Pick it up Saturday, 2 to 5 p.m. We won't be here." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my breath caught. My sister had locked me out of our family home. the place I'd lived my entire childhood, the place I'd come back to when I had nowhere else to go. Through the shock, I typed back, my fingers fumbling. "You think this is okay? Wait till I figure this out." It was pure bravado. Inside, I was crumbling. "Justin, did you know about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the phone back at my ear. "Not until this morning," he said, sounding uneasy. "Courtney called me, said you two fought and she was done. I didn't know she'd go this far." Done. She'd changed the locks while I was at an interview, cut me off without a word. "All my stuff's in there," I said, my voice cracking. "My designs, my laptop, my passport, everything." "Justin, look, give her a day to calm down. Maybe stay at a friend's place." I didn't have the heart to tell him I'd already burned through my cash on the motel. I hung up and sat on the porch steps, staring at the back door like it might magically open. Through the kitchen window, I saw movement. Courtney, her back to me, moving dishes like nothing had happened. She knew I was here and she didn't care. Rage replaced shock as I banged on the window. "Courtney, open the door," I shouted, but she didn't even flinch. I called again. Voicemail. My parents' phones were still off. I was locked out, alone, with nowhere to go. The reality hit like a freight train. I wasn't just homeless. I was erased. My clothes, my sketchbooks, my entire life were trapped inside that house, and my own sister had slammed the door shut. I drove back to the motel, my hands shaking so badly I nearly swerved off the road. That night I couldn't sleep, the cheap mattress creaking under me as I scrolled through my phone, desperate for a distraction. Then I saw it, a post on Courtney's Instagram. A photo of her, mother, and dad at the kitchen table, smiling over takeout. The caption, "Family night, nothing better." My heart shattered. They were acting like I didn't exist, like they hadn't just thrown me out. The next morning, I woke up disoriented, the motel's stale air heavy in my lungs. My phone was dead. I'd forgotten my charger in the house. I used the motel's Wi-Fi to check my bank account, hoping to scrape together enough for another night. That's when I got the second blow. My joint account with Courtney, the one we'd set up years ago for shared expenses, was empty. $850 gone. The bank app showed a withdrawal by the primary account holder, her, the day before. I called the bank, my voice shaking. "There's nothing we can do," the representative said. "You're a secondary holder." Courtney hadn't just locked me out of the house. She'd cut me off financially, too. I sat on the motel bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, trying to piece together a plan. I had no job, no savings, and now no home. I emailed the design firm from my interview asking for an update, but got an auto-reply saying they'd get back to me next week. I called Justin again, hoping he'd heard something. "Courtney's not budging," he said. "She told me you're ungrateful, that you've been freeloading. I tried to talk to Aunt Marilyn, but she's on Courtney's side." Freeloading. I'd paid what I could, worked my ass off to contribute, but to them I was nothing. By noon, I drove back to the house, hoping to catch someone leaving. The driveway was empty. Mother and Dad were probably at the office, Courtney at a showing. I sat in my car, staring at my childhood bedroom window, wondering how it had come to this. A neighbor, Mrs. Larson, waved from her yard. "Tiffany, everything okay?" she called, her brow furrowed. I forced a smile, humiliation burning my cheeks. "Just locked out," I said, keeping it vague. She nodded but didn't press, and I drove away, feeling smaller than ever. That afternoon, I used the motel's computer to job hunt, applying for anything: retail, waitressing, even temp work. Every click felt like a surrender, but I had no choice. My phone buzzed with a new email, and my heart stopped when I saw the sender, Walsh and Foster Law Firm. Subject: Urgent Hayes Family Trust. I opened it, expecting some legal threat from Courtney, but the words didn't make sense. It mentioned my grandmother, Clara Hayes, and a trust I'd never heard of. Please contact us immediately, it ended, listing a number for an Edward Walsh. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What had Clara done? And why was a lawyer reaching out to me now? Sleep didn't come that night. I lay on the motel bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of Grandma Clara. She'd been my safe haven, the one who saw me when my family didn't. I remembered her last visit, a year before she passed, when she pulled me aside at a family dinner. "Tiffany, promise me you'll keep designing," she'd whispered, her eyes fierce. "No matter what they say." I'd nodded, assuming it was just her usual encouragement. Now, with this email, I wondered if she'd meant something more. Had Clara known Courtney, or my parents would try to crush me? The next morning, I drove to Walsh and Foster's office in downtown Asheville, a sleek glass building that made me feel out of place in my wrinkled blouse and faded jeans. My stomach churned as I rode the elevator to the 10th floor, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, ushered me into a conference room with leather chairs and a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Edward Walsh entered moments later, tall and silver-haired, his suit sharp enough to cut glass. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a seat. "I understand you're in a difficult situation." "That's an understatement," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. "My sister locked me out of our family home, and now I'm getting emails from a lawyer. What's going on?" Edward's expression didn't waver. "I'm not your sister's lawyer, Ms. Hayes. I represent the Clara Hayes Trust, established by your grandmother before her death." My breath caught. A trust. Clara had never mentioned anything like that. Edward opened a thick folder on the table. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said. "She set up this trust to protect her assets, including the family home, and to ensure her wishes were honored, particularly for you." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What wishes? What does this have to do with me?" Edward slid a document across the table, its legal jargon dense but clear on one point. The house in Asheville, the one Courtney had locked me out of, belonged to the Clara Hayes Trust, not my parents or my sister. "The primary condition," Edward explained, "is that the home remains a residence for all direct Hayes family members, including you, Tiffany, whenever you need it. Your sister and parents, Marilyn and Philip, are trustees, but their rights to live there depend on your guaranteed access." The words hit like a thunderbolt. The house wasn't theirs to control. It was Clara's, and she'd made sure I'd always have a place in it. "So Courtney changing the locks, that's against the trust?" I asked, my voice shaking. Edward nodded. "Precisely. When your keys failed to open the doors, it triggered an alert in the trust's monitoring system. Your grandmother anticipated potential family tensions." I sat back, stunned. Clara had seen this coming. She'd known Courtney's jealousy and my parents' control could spiral into something like this. "There's more," Edward continued, pulling out another document. "The trust includes a financial fund designated for your creative pursuits, fashion design specifically. According to our records, you've never accessed these funds despite working multiple jobs to support your career." My jaw dropped. "A fund for me?" I whispered, my mind racing back to college, waitressing nights to buy fabric, scraping by while Courtney and my parents watched, never mentioning a dime. Edward's face darkened. "As trustees, your family was obligated to inform you of this fund. We've uncovered withdrawals, significant ones that don't align with its purpose." He slid over a financial summary, and my eyes locked on the total. $120,000 siphoned from the trust over 4 years, spent on home renovations, a new kitchen, a master suite, a backyard deck. "They used my money to remodel the house," I said, my voice flat, betrayal sinking in like a blade. Edward nodded. It appears so. This constitutes a serious breach of fiduciary duty. We're conducting a full audit, but the preliminary findings are troubling. I felt the room tilt, the weight of their deception crushing me. Not only had Courtney locked me out of a house that wasn't hers to control, but she and my parents had been stealing from a fund Clara meant for me for my dreams. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why are you contacting me now?" Edward leaned forward. "The trust has safeguards. A local contact, someone Clara trusted, reported the lockout. We cross-checked with the key alert system and acted immediately." A local contact. My mind flashed to Mrs. Larson, the neighbor who'd waved at me yesterday, her eyes full of concern. Had Clara enlisted her to watch over me? Before I could ask, Edward handed me a USB drive. "This contains the trust documents and a personal letter from your grandmother," he said. "Read them carefully before deciding your next steps." I took the drive, my hands trembling, and left the office in a daze, the Asheville skyline blurring outside the window. Back at the motel, I plugged the USB into my phone's adapter, my heart pounding as I opened Clara's letter, dated 6 months before her death. "My dearest Tiffany," it began, her familiar handwriting filling the screen. "If you're reading this, things have gone wrong, and for that, I'm sorry. I've watched your family try to mold you into someone you're not, and I've feared their control would tighten after I'm gone. This trust is my way of giving you wings, even from beyond. The house is yours to call home always. And the fund is for your designs, your heart's work. You're stronger than you know, braver than they'll ever admit. Don't let them dim your light. It's all my love, Grandma Clara." I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Clara hadn't just loved me, she'd built a fortress to protect me, knowing Courtney's jealousy could turn vicious. I called Justin, my cousin, needing to hear a familiar voice. "Did you know about this trust?" I asked, my voice thick. He hesitated. "Not the details, but Grandma Clara talked about you a lot before she passed. She said Courtney was jealous. Always had been since you two were kids. Clara gave you her sketchbooks, her sewing kit, things Courtney wanted." The pieces clicked into place. Courtney's snide remarks, her fury when I mentioned Clara, it wasn't just control. It was resentment festering for years. "Courtney tried to get Clara to change her will," Justin added, his voice low. "Clara refused. I think that's why Courtney's so hard on you now." I hung up, my mind a whirlwind. Clara's trust wasn't just about money or a house. It was her way of standing up for me, of giving me a chance to fight back. But what now? Edward had mentioned options, forcing the trust, forcing Courtney to let me back in, or something else. I wasn't sure I wanted to live under the same roof as my sister, not after this. But one thing was clear, I couldn't let them get away with it. Clara had believed in me, and for the first time since that text from Courtney, I felt a spark of resolve. I wasn't just fighting for a key to a house. I was fighting for my life, for the dreams Grandma Clara knew I could chase. Grandma Clara's letter, her words about my courage, ignited a spark I'd long buried. Courtney had gone too far, locking me out of our family home in Asheville and plundering a trust meant to protect me. With the Clara Hayes trust documents as my shield, I was ready to confront her. Edward Walsh, the trust's lawyer, set up a meeting at his firm's office, a neutral battleground for what I knew would be explosive. "Focus on the facts, Tiffany," he said over the phone, his voice steady. "The trust speaks louder than words." My heart raced, but I steeled myself for the fight ahead, knowing Grandma Clara was with me in spirit. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10:00 a.m., 5 days after I'd uncovered the trust. I spent those days dissecting every page of the documents, etching the violations into my memory. The house wasn't Courtney's or my parents'. It belonged to the trust, and my right to live there was absolute. The financial fund, $120,000 drained for home upgrades, was a betrayal I couldn't unsee. I called my cousin, Justin Porter, to ensure he'd be there. "I've got your back, Tiff," he said, his tone resolute. "Grandma Clara would have wanted you to stand up." His words steadied me, but the thought of facing Courtney's glare and my parents' silence knotted my stomach. Tuesday morning, I arrived at Walsh and Foster's office early, my borrowed blazer feeling like armor. The conference room was stark, a polished mahogany table, towering windows, and an air thick with anticipation. Edward greeted me, his suit impeccable, and introduced Ms. Carter, an associate taking notes. A financial advisor from the trust's team sat poised with audit records. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the door swung open and my family entered. Courtney strode in first, her chin high, eyes cold. Marilyn and Philip followed, their faces guarded, trailed by their lawyer, Ms. Foster, a family friend whose smile didn't reach her eyes. Justin slipped in last, offering me a quick nod of support. Tension coiled in the room as we sat. Courtney stared at her nails, avoiding me. Marilyn gripped her purse, her knuckles white, while Philip kept his eyes on the table, his jaw tight. Ms. Foster adjusted her glasses, her demeanor cool. Edward opened the proceedings, his voice cutting through the silence. "We're here to address breaches of the Clara Hayes Trust, namely the denial of Tiffany Hayes's residence rights and the misuse of designated funds." Courtney's lips twitched, but she held her tongue. Edward passed out trust documents, their pages heavy with truth. The trust mandates Tiffany's access to the family home. Changing the locks is a clear violation. Ms. Foster leaned forward, her tone measured. "My clients regret any misunderstanding with the locks, but this was a family matter, not a deliberate breach." Edward's gaze sharpened. "A family matter doesn't justify barring a beneficiary for 5 days without remedy." He nodded to the financial advisor, who displayed a damning spreadsheet. "Our audit reveals $120,000 withdrawn from Tiffany's creative fund, spent on home renovations, a gourmet kitchen, a master suite, a backyard deck." The figures burned into the room, unassailable. Courtney broke her silence, her voice slicing the air. "That money improved the house which Tiffany benefited from." I snapped back, unable to restrain myself. "Benefited? I'm homeless, Courtney. You took my money, Grandma Clara's money, for your luxury upgrades." Her eyes flared, but Marilyn interjected, her voice wavering. "Tiffany, we were thinking of the family's future." Philip gave a curt nod, his silence louder than words. Ms. Foster tried to pivot. "These were clerical oversights, not intentional misuse." Edward's reply was steel. "Diverting funds meant for Tiffany's career without her consent is a fiduciary violation, not an oversight." Justin's voice cut through, calm but piercing. "Grandma Clara told me about the trust before she died. She wanted Tiffany safe, especially from this." He turned to Courtney, unflinching. "You pressured her to rewrite her will, didn't you? To cut Tiffany out." The room went still. Courtney's face drained of color, her hands clenching the table. "That's nonsense," she spat, but her voice shook. Justin pressed on. "Clara said you were jealous, bitter that she gave Tiffany her sketchbooks, her trust, her heart." Marilyn's breath hitched, and Philip stared at Courtney, his composure cracking. Edward capitalized on the moment. "Ms. Hayes's actions activated the trust safeguards. We have text messages, bank statements, and renovation invoices." He handed a folder to Ms. Foster, whose eyes darted across the evidence, her confidence faltering. "Tiffany," Edward said, turning to me, "would you like to speak?" I met Courtney's glare, my voice steady despite the storm inside. You've controlled me my whole life. You, Marilyn Phillip, you buried my dreams, locked me out when I needed you. And worst of all, you betrayed Grandma Clara. She trusted you to protect me, but you stole $120,000 meant for my designs. Courtney's eyes blazed. You're selfish, Tiffany. We gave you a home, a future, and you squandered it on your silly drawings. Her words cut, but I held firm. They're not drawings, Courtney. They're my life. Grandma Clara understood that even if you never will. Marilyn's tears spilled over. We only wanted you to thrive, she said, her voice breaking. I shook my head. No, Marilyn, you wanted me to be Courtney, to fit your mold. That's control, not love. Philip stayed mute, his face etched with shame, offering no defense. Edward stepped in, his tone unyielding. Clara foresaw this conflict. Her letter, shared with all parties, details her concerns about controlling behavior. He distributed copies, and as Courtney read Grandma Clara's words, her defiance wilted. The letter was raw, exposing her jealousy and my parents' complicity. Ms. Foster whispered to Courtney, who nodded tightly, her jaw clenched. Edward shifted focus. We need a path forward that upholds the trust. Tiffany, your proposal. I pulled out a document, my voice calm but resolute. I'm not after vengeance. I want freedom. First, the trust purchases a condo for me using the creative fund you drained. I'll build my career my way. Second, you keep the house, but an independent trustee oversees every cent to prevent further theft. Third, we part ways. No contact, no manipulation, no more lies. Courtney's eyes widened, her breath sharp. Marilyn's tears fell silently, and Philip stared at the floor. Ms. Foster conferred with Courtney, who shook her head. What if we say no? Courtney asked, her voice low. Edward replied, his words precise. The trust's terms will be enforced. Removal as trustees, recovery of misappropriated funds, and possible eviction from the home. Ms. Foster's expression hardened, and she consulted Marilyn and Philip. After a taut pause, she spoke. We will review the proposal within 48 hours. Edward nodded. The trust demands swift resolution. As the meeting ended, Courtney stood, brushing past me without a glance. Marilyn paused, her eyes pleading. Tiffany, we didn't mean for this, she said softly. I met her gaze, unflinching. But it happened, Marilyn, and you allowed it. She flinched, then left. Philip lingered, his voice barely audible. I failed you, he said, more to himself, before following. Justin stayed, his hand on my shoulder. You were incredible, Tiff, he said. Grandma Clara would have cheered. I forced a smile, my heart heavy with relief and loss. Edward escorted me to the elevator. You've changed the game, Tiffany, he said. That's no small feat. I clutched the documents, the weight of my stand sinking in. I'd faced Courtney, my parents, and their lies, holding them to account. But the fight wasn't done. Not until the proposal was signed. Not until I had my own ground to stand on. As the elevator descended, I thought of Grandma Clara, her unwavering faith in me, and knew this was only the beginning. 47 hours after the meeting, Edward Walsh called with news that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. My family had signed the proposal. Courtney, Marilyn, and Philip had agreed to my terms. The Clara Hayes Trust would buy me a condo using funds from the creative account they'd drained. They'd keep the family home in Asheville, but an independent trustee would watch every cent. And most importantly, we'd go our separate ways. No contact, no strings, no more battles. It wasn't the dramatic victory I'd half expected, with tears and apologies. It was quieter, messier, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to their control and won. A month later, I stood in the living room of my new condo. a modest one-bedroom in a vibrant Asheville neighborhood. Sunlight poured through wide windows, catching the bare walls I'd soon fill with my own designs. The space was small but felt boundless, a canvas for a life I could shape without Courtney's shadow or my parents' expectations. The trust had covered the purchase and set up a monthly stipend to tide me over while I rebuilt. My belongings, once held hostage in the family home, arrived on a tense Saturday afternoon. Justin helped me unload his pickup truck, packed with boxes of sketchbooks, fabric swatches, and my laptop. Courtney wasn't there. She'd left the key with a neighbor, avoiding me entirely. Marilyn sent a stiff text. "We hope you're okay." I didn't reply. Philip said nothing, as always. Unpacking felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. I found Grandma Clara's old sewing kit tucked in a box with her note. "For my little designer." I traced her handwriting, tears prickling my eyes. She'd known I'd need this, not just the condo or the money, but the courage to break free. That night, I sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching my first collection for a fashion brand I'd dreamed of launching. Each line felt like a promise to Clara, to myself, that I wouldn't let their betrayal define me. The hardest part wasn't the silence from my family. It was the void they left. I'd spent years chasing their approval, bending myself to fit their mold. Letting go of that felt like losing a limb, even if it was one that had always hurt. I started therapy with Dr. Sharon Coleman, a warm woman who specialized in family dynamics. "You're rewriting your story, Tiffany," she said in our first session, her voice gentle but firm. "That's painful, but it's powerful." She helped me untangle the guilt, the nagging voice that said I'd torn the family apart. "They made choices," she reminded me. "You're making yours." Slowly, I learned to release the past, to see their control as their burden, not mine. Justin became my anchor. We'd never been close growing up. He was older, living in Charlotte, but the trust brought us together. Over coffee one weekend, he opened up about Grandma Clara. "She worried about you," he said, stirring his latte. "Courtney's jealousy wasn't new. Clara saw it when you were kids, how Courtney resented the time she spent with you." I nodded, remembering Courtney's snide remarks about Clara's sketchbooks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. Justin shrugged, his eyes soft. "I thought you'd figure it out. And you did." We laughed, a rare moment of lightness, and I realized he was family in a way Courtney never could be. With the condo as my base, I threw myself into my career. The trust stipend let me breathe, so I could chase opportunities I'd once only dreamed of. I applied to a fashion accelerator program, pitching my collection, bold, vibrant designs inspired by Asheville's art scene. To my shock, I got in. The program connected me with mentors, fabric suppliers, and a small team to bring my vision to life. I launched my brand, Clara's Thread, a nod to Grandma Clara's legacy. My first online drop sold out in days, and the orders kept coming. A local boutique reached out, wanting to stock my pieces. It wasn't fame or fortune, not yet, but it was a start, proof I could build something real. The biggest shift was my sense of home. For years, I'd tied it to that house in Asheville, to a family that never truly saw me. Now I was building a new one, not of blood, but of choice. Justin visited often, bringing stories of his own life, his own dreams. I made friends in the fashion program, artists and creators who cheered my wins and shared my late-night sketches. Dr. Coleman became a guide, helping me set boundaries I'd never known I needed. "Family isn't where you're born," she said once, her words echoing Clara's. "It's where you're free to be you." 6 months after the settlement, my life felt like my own. Courtney, Marilyn, and Philip faded into the background. No calls, no texts, just silence. I heard through Justin that Courtney was struggling to adjust to the new trustee's oversight, her control over the house slipping. Marilyn started therapy, grappling with her role in our rift. Philip stayed quiet, but Justin said he seemed regretful, carrying a weight he'd never voice. I didn't dwell on it. Their choices were theirs. Mine were here. In my condo, my studio, my designs. One morning, as I prepped for a meeting with a potential investor, I got an email that stopped me cold. An invitation to showcase Clara's thread at a regional fashion expo. It was the kind of break I'd barely dared to imagine. I stood in my condo, sketches spread across the table, and picked up a framed photo of Grandma Clara, her smile fierce and knowing. "You saw this, didn't you?" I whispered, my voice thick. "You knew I could do it." In that moment, I felt her with me, her faith a steady hand on my shoulder. As I headed out the door, portfolio in hand, I glanced around my condo, my home, my sanctuary. Grandma Clara had given me more than a trust. She'd given me the chance to break a cycle of control and carve my own path. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was mine, built on truth and courage. I closed the door behind me, ready for whatever came next, knowing I was finally free.